Uh, okay, long time no see, Wilson. So
Yeah.
we
Feels
had
like
your
it hasn't been that
brother,
long.
we had your brother here last week from DigiKey. And we had Clara the week before from Securian. So been hitting that. So why don't you give a quick introduction? So yeah, we were trying to remember, did you just graduate last year or a year, 2 years ago? When did you graduate? What internships did you do? What did you do as a student here? And yeah, how did you get where you are now?
Yeah. I graduated spring of 2023, so little over little over a year. I've been working. Um, I actually had two internships while I was in college. Let me take a step back. I majored in CIS. I did a double concentration, one in health informatics and one in is it software development? I don't
Yep,
remember
that's all
anymore.
right.
Yeah. Um, so I have a big interest in healthcare. Not necessarily like the patient side of it, but the you know kind of working with that healthcare data on the back end and whatnot. But haven't gotten into that with my career so far. But um, yeah, definitely something I'm interested in. So it was the summer after my sophomore year, I got an internship at this small company. I'm from a small town in Minnesota, a small company called ECMEC, and they're kind of in charge of like all the technology systems for a lot of the surrounding schools. And I was working on their team, and I was kind of it was like a cybersecurity internship. As an intern, I was doing a lot of like vulnerability scanning and figuring out how different schools were doing with their vulnerabilities and trying to come up with reports and how they could, patch these vulnerabilities and stuff like that. Um, and then since it was kind of dealing with schools, I kind of was doing a lot of like the IT stuff as well. So, um, helping set up iPads and Chromebooks and stuff like that. So, that internship, it definitely wasn't something that interested me a lot. But it was pretty cool to get an internship the summer after my sophomore year. And that definitely helped me get my internship after my junior year because they really liked to see that I had internship experience. So one of those things that I kind of had to tough through the summer after my sophomore year. It wasn't like the most invigorating thing I was doing, running these vulnerability scans and stuff like that. But definitely helped me get the foot in the door for the next summer where I interned at Security and Financial. That's where Clara works. That's where I work now. Um, and got on a team. It's called the investments team. So we were dealing kind of with the company's investment side on the back end, a lot of batch job processing, a lot of all just back end stuff. And it was super fun for me. I got work on like a singular large project where we were taking some old Java batch project or process, and we were trying to convert it to use a bunch of new things. It was very outdated the way things were working and using um, stuff like streams and queues and stuff like that. It was all stuff going into it, I had no idea what I was doing, but I had a great mentor that helped me work through it, and I learned a lot that summer. Um, and then they ended up offering me a job at the end of that internship, which I started last summer. I took a little time off after school. I highly recommend that for anybody and everybody if you're financially able to do it. I know it's not for everybody, but if it is something, I do recommend taking some time because you're going to spend the rest of your life working. And I do recommend if you have had the ability to just take some time that if you graduate in the end of fall, take some time, a couple months or something like that, or if you graduate in the spring, just kind of take some of the summer because I especially in this field, if you're not a teacher or something like that, you don't get summers off. It's not as not something that you're necessarily used to, always growing up. So, yeah, I started in August of last year, so it was nice to get some time off. And yeah, that's where I'm at now. I don't know if you want to kind of continue with what I'm doing now, or if anybody has any questions yet. I don't want to just steal the floor the whole time.
All right. Yeah, we'll see if we have any questions. And again, online people, remember you can either ask, unmute, or else just put it into chat. We'll watch chat. Let me pop up the chat window here so we can have that open. And Hunter.
I asked this question, but I'm always so curious. Like, what is your average work day, work week?
Yeah, getting into what you're doing now, what does your average work day or work week kind of look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. So security and financial is hybrid right now. Something that is kind of causes some tension at the workplace. I think a lot of people got used to the remote work during COVID, and it's something that Securian owns two very large buildings in downtown St. Paul, and they don't want to give up the building, so they're requiring us to come in a few days a week. Right now, it's 2 days a week, and actually, starting in February, we're bumping up to 3 days a week in person. So commuting right now, where my team goes in Tuesdays and Wednesdays, but it's very flexible if you're not able to go in, when your team, it's just, go in when you're able. But it's nice to go in when your team's in there because, it's not super fun going in the office when nobody's in there and you're just on an empty floor. It's like, I'd rather be at home anyways. But yeah, so as for the actual work I do, I'm kind of in a unique situation for my team is it's pretty large right now. I'm not sure the exact number, but we're somewhere around 20 to 25 people on my team, it's a large team for we do agile development. It's very large for that. So we're actually split off into 3 pods. And it creates some unique challenges because we're 3 pods all doing different work, but we're all in the same code bases. So we have to do a lot of coordination with each other amongst the pods to be making sure that we're all not stepping on each other's toes. And when we go to deploy stuff to prod, we got to make sure that all of our code is working and not just a single pod's code. So that's part of the challenge. But so I'm on my pod is I want to say I think there's 6 of us. We have there's been a lot of switching around. There's a lot of change happening. So our team has changed a lot over the past few weeks, few months. So right now we're sitting at, I believe we have 4 developers, 1 tester. It makes it a little tough for the 1 tester having to test the work of 4 developers. It's doable. He's a really good tester. And he does a lot of automated tests and stuff like that. But then we have 1 product analyst. So they're the ones that are kind of dealing with the business side of things and working with our engineers and kind of making sure that us software engineers are able to understand what the business needs by through the product owners and product analysts, because they're working closely with both us and the business people and what they need. And then and then we have 1 product owner, so they're kind of overseeing the whole team and working with the business as well. We used to have a Scrum Master. I don't know if we talked about Scrum Masters in these courses. That's part of there's challenges going on in the company right now, and unfortunately had to let go our Scrum Masters. It's kind of a tough time. We're dealing with some expense issues at the company, so they decided that we have to do our agile processes on our own as a team. So that provides some of its own challenges as well. But on to my actual work day, which I've kind of avoided the question, but now here we are. Yeah, so my pod, we have our daily stand-up at 9 a.m. every day. I usually start at about 8 a.m., but it's really nice is it's very flexible. I'm not having to like clock in at 8 a.m. So I got a late night the night before, I can push back and start at 9 when stand-up is, or if I'm ready to get going, I can start a little bit earlier. It's very flexible. So yeah, we have a 15-minute stand-up. We go through our stories and what everybody's working on, and what people have been doing, what they're planning on doing during the day. Classic Scrum. And then my team, we do or my pod every day we do we call it so my team is called the Transformers. So a lot of our stuff is Transformer themed because we are working on like this big transformation project. So that's why we're called the Transformation or the Transformers, because we're doing a lot of transformation to our current system. And so at 10 o'clock every day, we do a meeting called Rollout, where mainly the developers, but kind of everybody on the team, we get together, and anybody who during stand-up mentioned like, hey, I'm stuck on this one thing, we kind of all get together, or just a few different, we kind of split off into different groups and figure out who needs help with something, or we take those opportunities to do some paired programming if things are challenging and whatnot. Yeah, and that those are like the two things that are consistent every day. So my team does 2-week sprints. So our sprints end on it's kind of interesting. They end on a Wednesday and we start the next sprint on a Thursday. So today's actually the first day of a new sprint for us. So when a sprint ends on a Wednesday, we have a retrospective we do in the afternoon, where we look back on the sprint, and we usually do some sort of activity where we're like talking about, what went well, what was okay but could have been better, what didn't go well, like where are we at risk of kind of falling apart, and what do we need to improve, and trying to create some goals going into the next sprint, which is usually something that a Scrum Master is kind of taking charge of. So we're kind of having to tackle that as a team ourselves. And then just got done with it on Thursday. Then when we start a new sprint, we do sprint planning in the morning. So instead of our daily stand-up, we start planning for the next sprint, where we look at the stories from the last sprint, try our best to complete stories in a sprint. But if we didn't, we talk about what stories need to be rolled over. What do we have to continue working on this coming next sprint, and what are the new stories that we're bringing in? And then in our sprint planning, sorry, go ahead.
Wilson, so where do the stories come from? Are you writing the stories? Is your business or your analyst writing the stories? And then are you assigning points or weights to them, or how does that work? And then and then do you pick which stories you want to do, or are you assigned, or how does that work?
Yeah, great question. So the stories pretty much come to us just as bare bones. Our product owner and product analyst are working closely with the business and figuring out what their needs are and what timelines we need to hit. So they bring, kind of like bare bones requirements to us. And I forgot to mention this, that twice a week, typically, we're pretty flexible with these meetings. We call them refinement. It's where we look ahead at the stories that are on our backlog, and we try to take those bare bones and we try to build them out, figure out what are the requirements, what's the acceptance criteria, like what does it take for this story to pass, what do we need to do in this story. We task the stories at that point. We try to where we're breaking down that story into individual tasks that people can do. That's usually when we give them the story points as well. Let's see here. What else was in your question?
And then do you pick so you start a sprint. How do you know what stories you're going to do? Do you get to pick them? Do you pull them out of a hat? What do you do?
Yeah, it's pretty nice on this team. We're pretty autonomous, so people just kind of know what they're, maybe a little bit better at. So um, usually in sprint planning, we kind of, we that's also when we look at our stories, and sometimes we haven't refined all of our stories. So maybe that's when we break down the tasks in each story. But then that's also when we try to make sure that everybody has something to do. So it's less of like our product owner or anything like that, like assigning us stories, but it's more like, okay, who needs work if you're not like carrying something over from a previous sprint, like who needs work? And we try to kind of prioritize the sprint in order of like how quickly we want things done, or the order we want things done. So usually if you're looking for work, you kind of just look at the top story on our sprint that isn't being developed, and you just you try to look into it. And that's why you try to be really engaged in like the refinement meetings and the sprint planning to make sure that you really understand kind of what are the requirements for each story, so that you can kind of just jump into any story. Yeah, and then like kind of like once you finish one, you just we let our tester know that, hey, this is out there and ready to be tested, and then you kind of just go grab the next story on our sprint and just start working through it. Our team, we try not to like assign a certain story to somebody. We try to take it more granular to the task level, so that if there is work that could be done by more than one developer in a story, that that's possible. We try not to like say, hey, this is only my story and nobody else is touching it. I would say more often than not, though, it is typically like one developer on a story. Just because sometimes you can be like stepping on each other's toes if you're all working on the same story. But yeah.
Right. How about another question? Anyone online have a question? Yeah, Johnny.
Sort of languages and frameworks is used.
Okay, languages, frameworks. What kind of ID? Where are you working?
Yeah, my team. So we have a like a web application that's used internally. So we're doing both front end and back end development. Our back end is primarily in Java. So that's been pretty nice coming into this job, is very familiar with Java. Our front end, it's a legacy application, so a lot of old front end technologies used. But the nice thing is we're being the Transformers, we're trying to modernize things, so we're using Vue.js is our front end. It's very similar to React, if anybody's heard about React, for front end development. And we do some Python. We've done some Python recently in our we use AWS for our cloud. So we're doing like CloudFormation in like YAML files. It's a little beyond me. I don't know that super well. But some of the processes we were doing recently, we were creating lambdas in Python. So that was a good learning experience for me as well. It's kind of fun to be able to switch between some different languages and figure out where are the similarities, where are the differences, and how to best write code efficiently in the different spaces. So that's pretty heavily where we're at. Is I would say I do Java development for the most part, but also some of that front end stuff and Python here and there.
All right. Maybe another question here? Yeah, right.
On average, how many projects do you think you're working on in like an average week?
So yeah, are you working on just one project, and how many stories are you working on in that project?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kind of the funny thing is I hear a lot of people on the team say that, we do agile development, but everybody wants to put it in quotes because we work on projects. We like get like one big project and then work it till it's done, which is pretty waterfall. It's not super agile. We try to like make it agile, but it's a little tough because we typically get like one big project. We've been working on this big transformation project where we're like completely overhauling one of the screens on our application. Yeah, we've been working on it for a few months and we're hoping to wrap it up end of the year here. So really like the project, we only work on one project right now. That's what we've been doing. As for stories, it can really vary. Like sometimes you got a story. We try to point our stories anywhere from like 1 to 13. 13 is like one developer. It's going to take like a whole sprint for them to do it. And 8, so it's not, yeah, we go like 1, 3, 5, 8, 13. And 8 would be like one developer takes like a whole week. A 5 would be like half a week for one developer. A 3 would be maybe like a day or two, and a 1 would be like half a day or like a one-liner. We call that pretty frequently. It's like this is like a one-line code change. So I don't even have like a great estimate of like how many story points I do in a sprint, but I would say, you kind of look at the points. It's like a developer's probably doing about 13 points a sprint. So if you have like 2 5-point stories and a 3-point story, maybe you're doing 3 stories that sprint, or maybe you've got 2 8-point stories or an 8 and a 5, excuse me, or it really can vary, but usually getting a couple stories done a sprint. We try to break our stories down enough that it's very manageable for one person, and they're not having to bring like all hands on deck trying to like tackle this big massive story and trying to get it done before the end of the sprint. We try to make it very manageable for a sprint for one developer.
Other questions? Hunter?
So you mentioned that you're having some challenges on your team without having a scrum master. Would you say that like the challenges related to that have been kind of the hardest you've faced, or like what's like the hardest challenge you've faced in your career so far?
So you said you're having challenges with a scrum master and having to do that. Is that probably the hardest challenge you've faced while you're here, or what has been a challenging thing you've had to face? This sounds like an interview question.
These are
Does
yeah,
it
it's like
sound
what's
like a classic interview functional interview question? Very
yeah,
good.
it's
Good
like
job. I like that. Right.
name a challenge that you've had to overcome.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say, yeah, the agile processes without a scrum master, and that's probably one of the bigger challenges we have. I'd say a couple other things are, I've mentioned there's been a lot of change going on. So we've had a lot of new people coming into the team, and we've had a lot of people leaving the team kind of at the same time. So that provides its own challenges because constantly having to like make sure those who are leaving, they've kind of wrapped up their stuff and kind of done like transfer of knowledge and make sure that people know what they were working on and can continue. At the same time, bringing in new people and having to kind of train them in. It creates a lot of challenges to just, there's a lot of, change is always hard, and there's not a lot of like continuity. We're constantly having to, do new things and help new people, and that's certainly challenging. I would say one of probably the biggest challenge where we constantly have to face is my team. So we're called a shared service. So Securian is primarily a life insurance company, but they're getting into a lot of different benefits that they offer. I won't bore you with all that, but basically, there's different ways people can get insurance. You can get insurance through your employer. You can get insurance on your own. You can get insurance like through your bank for credit insurance and stuff like that. But essentially, all of those different areas are their own like parts of the company. And my team, like all those different parts of the company, like use our application. So the biggest challenge is having to work with all of these different parts of the company that are all using our application, and they all want their priorities to be number one. So they're all coming to us and saying, this needs to be done by X date. And we have to tell them, well, yeah, you're saying that, but these other areas are also telling us that. And it's not possible for us to all like have everybody's thing be a priority number one. So we're constantly having to battle and say like you all need to talk to each other and kind of work together. They don't really want to do that. They all want to be their own, individual standing alone solution, but it's hard when they're all using one application through us. So we're constantly having to battle with them and say like, we have to figure it out. Like, it's not sustainable for us to have 5 priority number ones. It's just not possible. Like, we have to have things that are like, if we don't get something done, something has to get, kicked off the pile or pushed down the road. Luckily, as like an engineer, I'm not having to be like on the front lines per se of that conversation all the time. That's kind of what our product people do. But it's certainly something that gets brought to us as a team because they're trying to work with us and figure out, what is something that's like, what's a reasonable amount of work for us to do. So we're constantly having to kind of battle with our product people to narrow down all of our priorities because everybody wants their thing to be number one. And it's a tough battle, but it's kind of fun at the same time.
All right. Maybe we'll have one more question out there. I think I'm gonna, if no one else has a question, I'm gonna just ask you about AI. Are you using AI at all in your coding? My students never use AI. They're always so smart. They don't never have to turn to AI. But so do you ever, does security, do you use AI and what, how are you using it?
Yeah, it's a great question. So actually this summer, I don't know if you remember Owen, I think probably mentioned he's piloting GitHub Copilot. Securian is also, we're actually we just got out of the pilot phase and we're actually like proceeding with expanding our usage, but I was able to be part of that pilot group. So I don't know if you guys have much familiarity with GitHub Copilot, but what's really cool about it, because they before I was at the company, they were piloting ChatGPT, and although that's great, the challenge is like ChatGPT, like you're putting in a prompt online, and it doesn't have like the context of your code, so it could give you an answer, and it's like, okay, that's maybe helpful for somebody, but it doesn't apply to our code. The nice thing about GitHub Copilot is in its name, it's supposed to be a copilot. So it is, we use IntelliJ. We just switched to that too, is IntelliJ is our IDE we use, and GitHub Copilot comes right into your IDE, and it offers some great resources. I use it all the time. One thing is it does inline suggestions. So as you're typing out your code, it'll suggest what it thinks you're trying to do. A really helpful way with it is you like put a comment and you like have a really descriptive comment of like, I want to, loop through this stream. It's got these objects on it. I want to look inside those objects to see if they have a match with this other object. And you just kind of, you can put a huge long comment in there, and then you just like click return, and then GitHub Copilot tries to suggest what, based on your comment, what it thinks you're looking for. And it honestly does a pretty darn good job. Like it more often than not is, at least pretty close to what you're looking for. So that's super cool. Another way that you can use it is that you can have just like a window pop up and you can just ask it questions. So, often the big thing I use is, since this is, when you get into the workplace, the code bases you're working with are huge. There's tons of files. There's so much in there that you have no idea what it even does. And I frequently ask GitHub Copilot, like, what is this doing? Like, what is this method doing? What is this single line doing? So many times I see a line of code, I'm like, I don't even know what this does. It's like, this is confusing. And then it'll give you a great explanation of, like, breaking it down line by line or piece by piece and saying, this is what each of these pieces is doing. And that just helps me understand, like, okay, what is it currently doing? And then, maybe reflecting back to your story and being like, okay, this is what it currently does. Where are we trying to go? And also just, so that's one thing, is having explain things, having it like simplify your code. So frequently, like, I'll write out, code, big method or something, and I'll say, simplify this, and then it'll make it more efficient. It'll make it more human readable, all sorts of stuff. Big thing I use as well for it is that it writes unit tests. So my team has just started an initiative where we're really pushing for getting more code coverage with our unit tests. So not something like I've been super familiar with, but GitHub Copilot is fantastic. When you write a method and say, generate a unit test for this, and it'll do all sorts of scenarios. It'll send in nulls to your method, and that's often how I figure out I've got flaws in my methods. It'll send in null values, it'll send in empty values and stuff like that, and all of a sudden my method will break, and I'd be like, okay, we don't want this to break. We want to be able to handle these scenarios and stuff like that. And then, if your test breaks and you're like, oh, it didn't handle null values, you go back to your method and say, hey, Copilot, make sure this can handle null values and blank strings and stuff like that, so we're not breaking. And then it'll rewrite your method to handle that. And it's really helpful to be able to use it as a guideline and a reference. Like it's not as big and scary as it seems, where sometimes people are like, oh, AI is going to take over the world. It's like, yeah, AI is great, but at the same time, it's dumb. Like, it doesn't know, like real world scenarios. It doesn't know, all the use cases and stuff like that. It doesn't know how to integrate everything with your system, because, and systems can be so huge, it can't know how everything possibly works. So it's learning how to use it efficiently and help it improve your coding, both in the quality you produce and how efficient you are at coding and stuff like that. So yeah, I'm using AI every day. I personally love it.
Sounds good. Okay. Well, I think we're gonna have to wrap up. It was great hearing from you again and seeing you.
Yeah.
Wave class.
Thanks for having me on, and hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
You too. See you later.
See ya.